Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's webinar organized by Funds for NGOs. Today's topic is how to lead a good enough transformation. I am Anutma and I'm here to facilitate this session. First of all, I want to thank each one of you for joining us. This webinar will run for 60 minutes, which includes 45 minutes of presentation followed by a 15 minutes of Q&A session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A option on your webinar screen to post your questions and we will respond to them during the Q&A session. Let's begin with the webinar's objective. The first objective is to understand the good enough transformation framework for climate action, apply practical community-driven strategies to launch sustainable initiatives, learn how to prioritize action and progress over perfection, gain inspiration from global examples of locally rooted climate innovation. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available in the video section of the Funds for NGOs premium website. And now, allow me to introduce today's trainers. Fran Erazo is the co-founder of Culturance, a Mexico City-based NGO that uses art, culture, and social innovation to create sustainable and more human-centered cities. With a background in art, architecture, philosophy, and urbanism, he promotes creativity as a tool for social change. For over a decade, he has actively engaged citizens in transforming their communities through creative interventions. He has also built global partnerships that connect public, private, and civil society sectors. By fostering collaboration, he helps drive environmental innovation and community-led development. His approach highlights creativity's role in reimagining urban spaces and strengthening social resilience. Jenny Sadik. Jenny Sadik is an arts leader, researcher, and practitioner bridging education, cultural strategy, and international collaboration. She is a manager of international programs and collaboration of at OCAD University, advancing global strategy and co-developing models for intercultural learning and climate action. A PhD candidate at the University of Ottawa, her research explores creative pedagogy in non-formal settings with fieldwork in the Bahamas on Global South epistemologies. She is the co-editor of Economia Creativa, issue 21, and her creative practice includes Crazy Dames, a long-term participatory art project with urban planner Sarah Woodou. Jenny has exhibited in major Canadian museums and facilitates initiatives connecting local communities with broader conversation in art and design. Now, I kindly request Fran and Jenny to lead the session and share screen.
Thank you, everyone. So as mentioned, I am joining from Canada and Fran is joining from Mexico, and we're grateful to be connecting with you all around the world. And thank you, Funds for NGO, for hosting and inviting us for this session. So today we'll explore the Good Enough Transformation Toolkit. It's a document that we produced as part of a larger initiative with a group of like-minded individuals around the world. I believe the toolkit will be shared with everyone to be able to follow along. We won't be going through the toolkit directly, rather we'll do an overview and you can follow along to the sections to dig deeper or potentially follow up on more areas you'd like to learn more about. So the toolkit, as well as our other documents we'll share with you later, are designed for NGOs and community organizations who want to act on climate action now, even when resources are limited, something familiar to all of us, and conditions aren't perfect. So we'll walk through the toolkit step by step as an overview, especially focusing on the how-tos, real examples, and simple checklists that you can hopefully adapt and use in your own contexts. So we have a session roadmap to share with you on the next slide. We'll go through the 8 practical sections of the toolkit document. For each, I'll introduce the idea, and Fran will also share real world examples from our consortium, the group of NGOs that we worked with to produce these materials. And we'll also close on each one with a simple action checklist that'll help you adapt immediately. Hopefully, by the end, you'll have a set of concrete steps that you can customize to your work and apply in your organization, no matter the resources you're working with. So I'll pass it over to Fran to share a little bit exactly what the good enough transformation is. Oh, sorry, I have a little more to share. I'll do an intro and then Fran will share in practice. So the good enough transformation, as we call it, or GET, is a community of practice of a research team bringing voices from 9 cities across 4 continents. At the heart of our work is a simple but powerful idea. Progress matters more than perfection. In communities around the world, organizations are proving that small scale, tactical, and collaborative actions can speak meaningful climate impact, even in the face of limited resources. GET celebrates these good enough approaches, which often embrace creativity, risk taking, and grassroots innovation to move vision into action. So we'll be sharing insights from community projects that blend traditional knowledge, small creative economies, and affordable hands-on solutions. These examples show how local groups are tackling environmental sustainability in ways that are practical, replicable, and deeply rooted in community ownership. We'll also highlight a little bit how arts and cultural practices can play a unique role in this work, helping communities build connections, amplify underrepresented voices, and create a sense of belonging around climate action. By starting where we are with the resources at hand, we can take steps towards sustainable community-driven transformation. So what we're going to be talking about is how you and your organizations can move from vision to action in easy steps, building climate initiatives that are realistic, inclusive, and impactful, starting, importantly, from the bottom up. So now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Fran.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello, everyone. So I'm here to tell you a bit about what does GET means in practice. So you have a more concrete idea of what the good transformation project is about. So from early 2024 to mid 2025, GET brought together a diverse consortium of organizations from 9 countries around the globe. We worked at the crossroads of culture, sustainability, design, urbanism, and grassroots community development. Driven by GET's commitment to progress over perfection, which Jenny was sharing with you, we wanted to spark the imagination of what meaningful climate impact could look like. So instead of aiming for flawless, large-scale solutions from the start, we focused on small, achievable steps that could evolve and grow. And we pivoted in 4 key places, which became, so to speak, transformation moments in what might be considered unexpected corners of the global south. Places rich with deep knowledge, rooted in the cultural practices, traditions, and history of their local communities. We call these transformation moments testbeds. This concept quite literally describes our action-oriented spirit of progress over perfection. And a testbed is a place to start small and test ideas, boosting discovery, learning, and creativity. Each testbed was an evolving episode of transformation in this sense. So the good journey took us from Mexico City in Mexico to Bobo Dioulasso in Burkina Faso, then to Nicosia in Cyprus, and finally to Kuching in Malaysia. In each of these locations, we learned, imagined, and deployed small-scale interventions. These interventions weren't the end goal. They were just starting points. The insights and successes from these small projects then became the backbone of the GET Toolkit, which is meant to share with other communities to inspire and support their own journeys of transformation. So I will briefly go and share a little bit deeper about the journey about in each of these places. So starting with Mexico. In Mexico City, GET explored the future of the city itself by looking in its own past. We dove into the ancient world of the Chinampas. Chinampas are a remarkable water-based and holistic system that brings together highly productive, self-sustaining farming with healthy and biodiverse ecosystem. The Chinampas are more than just farms. They're a paradise of rich cultural life and a model for green urbanism. Small family units are connected by canals, creating a vibrant integrated community. And the Mexico City testbed serves as a living laboratory. We imagined a climate adaptive, city-based on the Chinampa model, joining together a wide range of disciplines: biology, food, housing, community, economy, urbanism, and ecology. Our process was one of deep learning and community-based planning, working hand in hand with the true stewards and practitioners of the Chinampas. And perhaps more importantly, we engage with local youth who have never before heard about them. By reconnecting a new generation with this incredible heritage, we were not just preserving the past, but we were also building a more sustainable future. Then in Bobo Dioulasso, in Burkina Faso, our testbed was about the powerful coming together of rights and crafts. We explored this through vernacular architecture, contemporary artistic expression, and community encounters. The testbed here was a craft-based, collaborative design and construction process for an artist and choreographer residency. We used local materials and techniques, such as compressed earth blocks, and drew on traditional design concepts, like the circular house. This entire process was brought to life through artistic activations, ensuring that the building wasn't just a structure, but a living work of art. The core of this work was building together. We leveraged the knowledge of local artisans and community members to create a protocol for collaborative building. So this is not just a manual, but a blueprint for knowledge transfer designed to be replicated in other communities and empower them to build their own sustainable futures. Then the next testbed, the next step on the journey of GET, was in Malaysia, where we explored the idea of reciprocity, a concept deeply enrooted in tradition, nature, and community. We embraced reciprocity as a guiding principle for collaboration, community building, and environmental stewardship, bringing together changemakers, cultural practitioners, researchers, and storytellers from the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. The reciprocity testbed facilitated a rich dialogue between local and international participants. Through guided activities, discussions, and case studies, we reframed concepts of community and sustainability by grounding our conversations in Borneo's unique ecological and cultural realities and elevating local and indigenous voices. Our activities were hands-on and immersive. We engaged in mural painting, worked with the agricultural community, and spent a day with a community. We even experimented with ideas of cross-cultural and multi-species collaboration, pushing the boundaries of what it means to work together in a truly reciprocal way. And our final stop on the GET journey was Nicosia in Cyprus, a city that powerfully symbolizes the potential for conflict, transformation, and peaceful coexistence. The testbed was guided by the concept of the Gardens of the Future, which is an organization, and it brought together various stakeholders to explore low-cost interventions for a greener urban future, all while utilizing cultural heritage and traditional knowledge. We applied the learnings from our previous testbed into this unique context. Our work included designing and building prototypes with recycled materials, hosting participatory workshops, and organizing community gatherings. A key part of the project was building community gathering spaces centered around each built prototype. These spaces fostered social bonding, food sharing, and open discussions on local sustainability practices, proving that small, tangible projects can spark large-scale conversation and connection. So now back to my colleague, Jenny.
Thank you. Hopefully, what the projects that Fran has shared has piqued your interest, and you're interested in being able to do something creative, hands-on, and community-based, like we shared happened in the test beds. So we're going to start looking at the points of our toolkit. If you have not yet, the document is shared in the chat. It's not the same as the slides. It's the overall how-to guide that hopefully you'll be able to use after moving forward. And through the slides, we're going to walk you through what this means as an overview to hopefully help you start connecting to what this means to you, your organization in practice. So from what we learned, one of the first things that really came through was that every initiative begins with listening. As you can see throughout the toolkit, we emphasize that goals don't need to be identical across stakeholders, as we saw in the different formats used in the different test beds, but they must be reciprocal and ethical within the communities they are based. So, a great starting point is to think with your own communities and the local community's concerns, be it water quality, droughts, changes in wildlife. These are things that you probably already know a little about that you could identify, but hopefully we'll talk more about how your community itself will help solidify what you look at. Then you translate these concerns into measurable goals, such as improving water access, creating tangible benefits through circular economies, or bridging indigenous knowledge with modern sustainability. So these will ring a bell from the examples that Fran shared. So in our toolkit, we share a few questions that you can help ask yourselves, your colleagues at your organizations, as well as your community to help these things go and start identifying shared goals. These questions include, what environmental changes are most concerning to you? What outcomes would benefit the community most? What resources do you already have? What is missing? How do we measure success and how does that matter locally? So this answer will not be the same for everyone. So document these goals clearly and then share them widely. Set up iterative feedback loops, say monthly or quarterly check-ins to reflect, adapt, and keep momentum. Success here is not just about setting the goals, it's keeping them alive and fresh. So we have one example here to share with you from our work.
Yeah, and the example is from our Mexico testbed, where we saw the power of defining shared goals through a community-based planning session. So this gathering brought together around 30 local community members and stakeholders, from farmers and NGO members to government representatives, each one of them with unique expertise and perspectives. And the session was structured as a futures ideation session with 3 parts. The first part harnessed the power of listening. So it was really about creating an environment built on dialogue and encounter, an environment of trust and sharing. By subdividing these 30 people into smaller teams, we gave space for both individual and collective voices to be heard. This process brought together stakeholders who even were previously unrelated, but held very synergistic perspectives, revealing new connection and possibilities. The second moment was about taking this listening further and creating a shared language and a shared vision. Through this collaborative process, we worked to build a sense of shared language and imagination. We moved past the notion of problems and critique to the imagination of what could a unified vision of the city based on the reality of the Chinampas, the possibilities of the Chinampas be like. And the third part was about going beyond problem solving and diagnosis and going to the creation part. So this is beyond, this is about using artistic methods, um, which are very powerful to envision shared and long-term goals, which not only help define concrete short-term problems and needs, such as communication needs, access to resources, but also lay a path for longer-term vision and action, filled with opportunities yet to be discovered. And maybe more importantly, that carry the empathy of all the voices that are gathering around a single, one cohesive vision. So back
Great,
to
thank
Jenny.
you. So as Fran highlighted, these techniques cannot happen without that incredibly important first step of stakeholder mapping, which will ensure inclusivity and trust to be able to engage in these creative, thinking outside the box and envisioning new futures. So it helps to identify not just obvious players like government agencies, but also youth, artists, elders, local businesses, and Indigenous knowledge holders who are often overlooked. So, by making these roles clear and planning for conflict mediation where needed, organizations can prevent resistance and strengthen partnerships from the very beginning. So, in our own mapping throughout our group, some examples of stakeholders that were identified that may be helpful for you to consider. So it included local or Indigenous knowledge holders, artists and designers, youth groups and individual youth, funding partners, cultural institutions and creative industries, both locally and internationally, boards and advisory committees, community leaders, research institutions and other international organizations, private sector and civil organizations. So think about who you're already connecting with, but who can you still reach out to evolve to make sure these dialogues you're having are holistic?
So maybe to jump into example, I cannot just find enough words to emphasize the importance of conceiving the social dimension of a city, from its human and psychological to its organizational and institutional structures. So another example from the Mexico testbed, we try to imagine this exercise of stakeholder mapping by imagining the Chinampa environment itself as a small city, which has very different actors who enact and shape the Chinampas on very different levels, from the everyday basis to the governance level, who already have a lot of historical background and work already in place. And we try to draw these connections and interests as part of a kind of an architecture of relationships. And finding a way to describe these layers and the role each of these organizations or actors of different scales work. So in this map, we can see, for example, we have research centers, we have farmers, we have small families. Everybody of these small dots are like very important nodes in the system of the Chinampa. So a city or a Chinampa or a territory is never just the territory, of course. It's the relationships that are on top of it and the connections that happen. So with this consciousness in mind, then we designed a kind of a matrix. There are many techniques to go about this, but the important thing is to conceptualize how these different forces and players and interests relate, and how can other voices that maybe are not surrounding in the inner space, let's say, of this particular area, could also be united to specific interests. For example, the peripheral youth of Mexico City, many of who were unaware of the existence of this gem they have of a green future in their own, so to speak, neighborhood. Then we find very concrete ways to invite them, to engage them by connecting them to this network of opportunities.
Thank you. That works really well to bridge to our next topic within the toolkit, which is methodologies, because the how matters as much as the what. It's not just about what the outcomes you're looking for. As we've highlighted here, it's really about the process dictating that. So one thing we really want to advocate is for ethical, iterative, and community-led methods. So these approaches don't just deliver solutions we want, they help build ownership, belonging, and resilience. And in fact, they also help have the project have a life outside of the project itself because there's an organic connection to the community, as well as people having areas that they can input their own perspectives, activities, and interests. So the ripple effect of the work will be able to spread easily. So the call for using ethical methodologies means that the work should be done in ways that are fair, respectful, and inclusive of the people and communities involved. So what does that mean? So work with people, not on them. Instead of outsiders deciding what's best, or those in a privileged or formal position, the method should involve community members directly in planning, decision making, and action. Always respect Indigenous and local knowledge. So these groups will have deep place-based knowledge about climate and culture. Ethical methods make sure their knowledge is valued and not just used without credit or respect. And this is a process to give them room and input to help direct or direct themselves if that is their preference. Build equal partnerships. Ethical approaches try to balance power so that marginalized groups or communities aren't left out or silenced, as Fran mentioned about the youth. Be transparent and accountable. This sometimes is hard when we're the ones doing the work and running around and thinking we shared everything, but it might be all in our heads. Make sure there's ways to share and document your work and make sure that the community see that. The community should always know what is happening with the project, have chances to give feedback, and see how their input is shaping the outcomes, as well as opportunities for them to revisit and see if any of the methods or approaches should be done differently. And that takes us to the last point of being iterative and adapt. So ethical work doesn't mean getting perfect, and in fact, you probably won't. It means continually checking in, reflecting, and adjusting so the process stays fair, relevant, and useful. So the approaches you use at the beginning of a project might not be able to stay and last for the life of a project. So in short, ethical methodologies are about making sure the work is collaborative, respectful, and fair, rather than top down or extractive. They protect communities from being taken advantage of and ensure the results are meaningful and sustainable. Now, we won't go into all the details of different methodologies you may want to use. We can have a discussion around this later. But in the toolkit, we did share some examples of what has been used in our community of practice, including participatory action research, where communities co-lead every phase, arts-driven mobilization, storytelling, public art, creative interventions, IDPR cycles, which is a process that goes by the points of investigate, design, practice, and reflect, and repeat. Decolonizing approaches. Now, this is a blanket term that can be many, many, many things that respect sovereignty, reciprocity, and knowledge ownership, as well as what the whole GET consortium is itself. It's a community of practice, ongoing peer-to-peer learning. So today we here are all a new community of practice, and perhaps this is something and a network that we can continue to work with and grow. So the next point after this is tools and resources. So tools make projects effective and transparent. You'll see again, the toolkit emphasizes accessibility and using both digital and analog resources. Digging deeper in this section, you'll see it highlights practical tools. Uh, so we'll talk a little bit about a couple of them that are shared here. But hopefully these will all be something new. There'll be something new for you to connect and dig deeper in all these areas. There are many online valuable participatory mapping platforms that you might want to play with that help identify risks, assets, and priorities together as a group. Stakeholder mapping templates that are also available and open source can clarify who is involved, their influence, and their relationships. And once again, in the Toolkit PDF document, there's some examples of specific ones you'll want to look up online. Survey and feedback tools make it easier to gather input, especially from underrepresented voices. I think this is one many people are familiar with, but however, I would like to advocate that it's throughout the process, not just at the end. Community-based toolkits like the ones we've produced that provide step-by-step guides for adaptation and planning. Facilitation guides that ensure all voices are heard during workshops and roundtables, and a monitoring dashboard or other like setups that help track progress, transparency, and support adaptive learning. So there are many knowledge sharing platforms and forums that can help you get started in seeing what other organizations are doing, as well as many different technological tools from either open source software or different industries that can help you dig deeper into what you're doing. So hopefully you can research and start with some of the examples we share in the toolkit. But the key point is that these examples can ensure that, as we've highlighted, the importance of a transparent and responsive process. And we've also completed after these two sections an action checklist, which is our next slide. So we've thrown a lot of information at you for these things, but what can this mean in practice for you? Choose the tools that fit your community. Make sure they're accessible for everyone. They don't have to be tech savvy. Not everyone's necessarily going to be able to jump into that, but they'll be able to be something that you can customize and know what the best fit for your community is. So you'll see in the toolkit that we provide checklists like this throughout that'll hopefully be able to get you to go today and think about what's the right fit for you and your organization. And I believe Fran has an example of this.
Only a very quick note that, again, Burkina Faso's testbed and the Mexico testbed really highlights, which is how to discover, tap into, and have always kind of a curiosity approach regarding what local value there is. And if anything, the system of Chinampa itself, which many of the farmers describe the Chinampa system as a compost island made by what the place has, the elements, the matter of the place itself, and the definition of this concept of nature-based is really about how you can plan design with the resources that you have at hand, with nature, with, so to speak, itself. That is how you get to design this kind of zero waste, circular design approaches. Same case in Burkina Faso testbed, which the architecture, the vernacular architecture, and the building was built with the earth that is available there in the site and transformed through a very simple process of creating blocks of this earth. Back to Jenny.
Mm-hmm. I think, Fran, you're sharing the next one of indicators and metrics.
So back to me again. So just again, a quick note on indicators and metrics. It's always challenging to measure the impact of these processes, both in quantitative and qualitative perspective, let's say. In Get's work and its test beds, which are very local, very experimental, and qualitative in essence, We like to see an approach indicators and metrics more as an opportunity and to highlight the need to build metrics that account for the value of human connections and potential of new opportunities regarding shared goals. Build community-driven metrics because every community and every people value different things and situation, and they're of course responding to different situations. Another point is the notion of how to build experimental metrics that account for the progress over perfection approach, where errors and mistakes and unexpected outcomes are essential and part of the process. And at the same time, also take into account that some of the vernacular technologies, for example, and the knowledge of some communities that get investigates have stood the test of time. So they are valued by itself, so to speak, while at the same time acknowledging the potential of modern improvements and measurements to these systems. So GET would be about the promise and potentials of these testbed results more than the actual results itself, which is, of course, challenging to measure. But in reality, telling the impact story more than the impact metrics might be more critical in the context of GET and this kind of projects, which ultimately aim at inspiring what is possible and planting hope in the midst of challenges.
Great, Fran. And I think that storytelling part is really important, and maybe the thing that when we're bogged down with writing grant or funding reports, we think of the practical and we don't necessarily step back and think of these stories. So just to complement this topic of indicators and metrics, once again in the toolkit, we've prepared another action checklist for you that really focuses once again on co-designing with community members, establishing baseline data for all key indicators, scheduling regular monitoring and participatory evaluation sessions, using both quantitative and qualitative data for a holistic assessment, and sharing results transparently using findings to inform decision making. And as Fran mentioned, that can take on storytelling or more abstract forms. Okay, so our next point, it almost seems mean to introduce this at the end because it is overcoming challenges. And this is something, of course, that we're all very familiar because challenges are inevitable, from funding instability to policy shifts. So once again, the message here is prepare and adapt, which can also be prepare but adapt. So as part of our research interview process that we started the process with, we collected examples of hurdles and approaches to overcome that our members faced. So in the next slide, and this is also taken directly from the toolkit, sometimes it's just really nice to see how other organizations and like-minded individuals or individuals who are doing the same type of work, how they overcome certain things. So you can spend some time with the toolkit to look deeper into these, but I'm sure these challenges are not unfamiliar to any of us. Funding instability, knowledge fragmentation, and the need for direct participation, input for local indigenous communities, but also hopefully seeing change as opportunity. So you can see here, this is where we pulled some of the key messages of the GET work. Do first, permission later. I will admit, I did ask some permission during this process, but it's not about, getting shut down at the initial hurdles, seeing what can be done in new ways that maybe are creative and break the usual approaches, trying things out, not necessarily thinking of that perfection, and of course, spotting new opportunities. So you can look deeper in the toolkit about some examples. As well as thinking about how this bridges into appropriateness. So our next point is accessing appropriateness across contexts. So hopefully you're quite excited by all the things we've shared. But of course, the ways of doing the indigenous knowledges, the local materials, the discussions to this point will be completely different for every different organization. So part of the things that you can do that are still embedded in the community dialogue as well as within your organization is thinking about assessing appropriateness across your context. So there's no one size fits all, especially when using local knowledge. So think about cultural and social fit. Does the approach align with the local values, traditions, and lived experiences of our communities? Rituals or knowledge methods often need adaptation, careful assessment if it's appropriate to use at all, or careful facilitation when being applied in new communities. Environmental sustainability. Practices effective in one ecological zone may not translate directly to another. We must consider local climate, soil, materials available before applying architecture or agricultural techniques that we may have learned about from another region. And ethical knowledge and sovereignty. When transferring indigenous or traditional knowledge, ensure the originating community's rights and consent are respected. Always avoid extraction. Instead, foster reciprocal relationships, give credit to knowledge holders, and have knowledge holders available at the table to speak on their own behalf whenever possible. Which then brings us to the next section of the toolkit, strategies for scaling up. Scaling up works only if done ethically. And as we've seen here, context matters. You must be assessing cultural, environmental, and social fit before adapting a practice elsewhere. Co-creation is key. Involve your local stakeholders when scaling. If something seems that it's not feasible, take a step back and see where things should be assessed before moving forward. Once again, respect local knowledge sovereignty, credit and protect indigenous and traditional practices. And the real key here that we're bringing from creative practice and design is pilot small, workshop, experiment, try creative approaches that may not be permanent or lasting. See how they work. Test, adapt, and refine before rolling out widely. Imagine things in hypotheticals, in imagery, in visions, in playing things out first to see how they might be responded to or reacted to. And then our final point in the guide is sustainability planning. If you spend time reading the documents, you can see how we advocate for diversifying funding, how that also connects to cultural sustainability and adaptive leadership. But this really works as a summary of all the things that we've been talking about. The toolkit has guidance saying to blend multiple revenue streams, grants, earned income, in-kind support, community bonds, or crowdfunding. So these are points that are taken from what we heard from our members of our consortium when they were facing those hurdles. You have to just confront funding inequities. I mean, we all know this. Advocate for direct access for global South communities, especially, and ensure cultural sustainability. Transfer knowledge across generations, protect biocultural heritage, and integrate arts and storytelling. Now, this is very interesting from community to community. The intergenerational knowledge may have points that it is broken. So where within the communities do you also have to be thinking about what has been transferred, what has been carried on, and what has been adapted over generations? And hopefully this will all naturally evolve into empowering local governance and leadership. So what we want to advocate for is a dual approach of financial and cultural, thinking of sustainability in both of these senses to ensure projects not only survive, but they are also able to adapt and thrive. Of course, this is not something we will solve today, but hopefully these creative, risk-taking, but very conscious and considerate approaches will help enrich the work we're all already doing. So the final part of the toolkit that you'll see is an action checklist on how to diversify funding sources. It includes investing in that intergeneration knowledge transfer and cultural heritage protection, getting to know what this means in your communities, build organizational capacity in management and adaptive leadership, You're only as good as the people you're working with. And so also investing in each other and your knowledge and your training is important. And also, you're doing that first step by attending this, but how do you continue to learn and think of the world and your peers as a community of practice? And of course, regularly review and update your sustainability plan with community input, which is, of course, hopefully, if you take away one theme that we've shared today, is that the iterative community consultation is key as part of this. So I'll pass it back to Fran for a quick recap before we open it up to discussion and questions.
Thanks, Jenny. So very quickly, the toolkit, um, the journey of the toolkit walked us through 8 steps: defining shared goals, mapping stakeholders, choosing methodologies, selecting tools, designing metrics, preparing for challenges, scaling carefully, and planning for sustainability. Each one of these in the Get Toolkit comes with an action list. Above all, the guiding principle, as we have been um, seeing, is progress over perfection. And that telling the story of that optimistic, small scale, hopeful, action oriented transformation moment as a way to cultivate inspiration, to show what is possible, while always also showing that places and communities have a heart of tradition. There lies practical cues and gems of knowledge for meaningful climate action and innovation, and evolving episodes for a green transformation.
So we'd like to leave you with a call to action. If you can each choose one checklist item that we've shared that you can pull from the toolkit that you can act on this month, that is enough to start the transformation. Hopefully, you can continue to use your toolkit, the toolkit we've created as your guide. We want to share it with you to help you and your community learn. We'd love to continue to hear from you about how can expand, because collective sharing is how local action becomes a global change. And that is the overall spirit of the Good Enough transformation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Fran and Jenny, for the insightful presentation. Participants, now we will begin the Q&A session. Please send in your questions so that we can take up in this session.
We can also take this as an opportunity to share that the toolkit we've been focusing on today is only one of many resources that we've put together as part of the Good Enough transformation. We have a full website that's hosted by our main partner, TransEuroPulse, that you can explore all the different resources that we have to share with you.
All right, so the first question is, how do you decide when a project is good enough to move forward?
Fran, do you want to speak first?
Maybe to clarify, it would depend at what stage. When we decide to move forward, maybe there is, if it's an early stage and we're in the planning process, the stakeholder mapping and the mapping of opportunities pretty much leads the way as indicating where opportunities are. And those opportunities are the ones that should lead the process. Those are very local, but also could be, I don't know, international opportunities that might be very much interested in that particular local thing happening. If it's in a later phase, it depends um, on everything that has happened, but so it would be very abstract to give a recommendation in this sense. We would only be advising that to try to always be strategic in the sense of never losing the tenets and the principles, but also be very practical, because these kinds of projects and these kinds of practices are very challenging, and one has to always have a clear objective in mind. Be very adaptive to the opportunities and be very swift to open and to change. Is This kind of projects don't get very well along with stubbornness, although sometimes you have to be stubborn, but most of the times you have to be very open and adaptive. And any good plan is a plan that is flexible. No fixed plan and rigid plan is a good plan.
Yeah. And I'll add that if you think of the first step as stakeholder mapping, you can right away launch into something that's engaging your community as long as you're aware of what your core values are and you're ready to do so ethically. Getting started doesn't mean it has to be firm, and it doesn't mean you have to keep going completely. You can do something to pilot and test, such as a community workshop or creative activity, that will also help inform how you and your organization decide to move forward. So, crowdsourcing ideas at a beginning stage could be very valuable.
Thank you, Jenny and Frank, for the answer. The next question is Peter from Nigeria asking, in a community where there is community crisis, how do you overcome such challenges to build sustainable projects?
Mhm.
I would say this has to be again part of the conceptualization of the entire process. So before we can even get to talk about solutions sometimes and futures and sustainability, one has to first do the work of building trust and be very sensitive as how to and where is it possible. And again, tools as stakeholder mapping could be very useful because it's also a way to map where conflict is rooted, how deep it is, and where can we find particular allies, so in a sense, or people that might be interesting on different sides of the of of yeah of a territory, of a problem, etc. And plan and design and prepare conversations. Backdoor conversations, backstage conversations are always very, very important. The way you approach people is always very important. Um, we always say that you cannot solve everything in a forum mode. You have to prepare to the forum and to the gathering of a large group of people, because when large group of people gather, it's very easy that conversations and tendencies and go to the trend of groups and sometimes even factions. So it is very important to plan different layers of preparatory work just to lay the ground for the conversation to happen.
Mhm.
And this is particularly the case with territories in conflict. So it's about empathy and knowing really what the problems are, be very, very practical about what you can solve and when you can't, and just prepare many layers of conversations before getting to an actual conversation, just to sharing and listening, and then maybe steps ahead, you get to the point of solutions. Now, just very quickly, we would always suggest, and this is the power, some of the powers of that art has. There's something when you bring art into the process, artistic tools that foster imagination, um, that invite people not focusing on the problems themselves, because thinking about problems and rationalization of problems and analytics of problems always get too emotional on the sides of taking sides. So when you pose the question as let's imagine together what could be, even as fantastic as it may be, that is also an opener of conversations, and always uh, remember to facilitate these things, as is advocating for creativity, for listening. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Mhm. I'll also add that to not decide against advancing in work or a project because these deeply rooted issues or barriers exist. And to also not just feel that you're in it alone to try to tackle these things. Just as we were talking about preparing for challenges and to, conflict can be easily deeply embedded in these things. That could also be prepare yourself for training yourself and your team, but also thinking of what other voices you bring to the table. Are there professional or local mediators that should be part of these conversations? Are there community respected leaders or elders that should be part of these conversations as well? Is there a way, as those building relationships that Fran spoke about, come to a point where everyone can come to a literal or figurative table? A lot of that networking and discussion and hearing from people who've worked within these areas that have different conflict or ownership or different ways of thinking or doing. Also think about who else you may need to connect with to be able to do this work, and who, if you don't necessarily have the skills or those rights within your group, who can you work with to do so?
Thank you, Jenny, for your input. The next question we have, are there any recommended time limits for transformation? And what are the checklist tools?
I mean, I would say no, because I mean, every transformation could be something small, the way you decide to do something yourself today, or it could be how you want to change, say, how your community sees agriculture, right? Those things would have very different timelines. But I think one thing that is interesting is when we're working, often we have to find different sources of funding, and they might have conflicting timelines that we have to follow. So it's kind of good to think about the nice to haves and what's ideal and what can we do on a small scale, what can we do in an afternoon versus what can we do over 2 or 3 years. So I would just think like a great win for all of us is to think of a small transformation or thing to do today, such as maybe connecting with a new community member that can help you with this work. Uh, you could say, hey, I'm going to do that by the end of the week. What is today? Tuesday? We could probably do it. We could send out an email. But I think for myself, I find writing these things down or using a tool like Miro or even just putting post-it notes around for myself to remind myself that these are things that I can tackle and that they're feasible, those will help me get to those bigger transformations. So I would just say there is no timeline, but also think about what's feasible. Be prepared for hurdles. If your project, you give yourself realistically a timeline of a year, be prepared, especially when working with communities and other individuals, that you have to work around other people's availability and schedule. So be very flexible with them. But give yourself some small wins. Give yourself some things that you can feel that you're starting that transformation right away.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for your input. The next question is, what do you do in a situation when a project is moving well, but later the community became skeptical, skeptical about the project due to misleading information from a different source regarding the project?
Oh, that's very interesting. Fran,
Mhm.
did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key of the answer is information, and this is a communication problem, I would say. So the communication is always um, something like immensely important in every part of a project. One has to like take very like take very much care of the perception of how the project is born, being led, what are the results. And we advise always to have a communication plan running besides the activities. This is all about people, and people is all about communication. So be always very mindful about uh, yeah, about communication tools. And if you don't have them, um, reach out to people to that might help with this. but don't ever underestimate the power of information and communication. Because, I mean, maybe this is happening to you. Like a good project could be spoiled because, there is misinformation, and sometimes there are like active agents or actors that benefit from, seeding misinformation and yeah, all sorts of things.
Hmm.
So you can create new events, you can launch campaigns, you can and again, we would say like pivot on the positive and inspiring things that your project has. That always finds a way into people. Art again has a way to convey these messages, and there are many like tactics on the communication side that you could use. So I would say don't lose hope and look into that domain.
Yeah. And I would just add that you want to make sure your narrative is coming from you. And sometimes, especially when we're with small teams, it's hard to be sharing while we're doing. For instance, you might have been doing work with the community for months, but nobody has seen that yet. So think about where you can share in process. So you are sharing the narrative of the work you're actually doing instead of maybe someone else interpreting it or opposing. And that could be done through blogs, social media, just kind of capturing and documenting the process. As we talked about throughout, transparency is key. Yes, it sometimes takes a little extra work, right? We're not all communications experts. And I've done a thing where I've worked on a workshop all day, and the last thing you want to go and do is put pictures on Instagram because it's over. You want to go lie down. You're done with it for the day. But even just visual representation and showing the positivity, impact, and enthusiasm that's happening around your project, if there's a way that can come from you and your organization, try to keep that consistent and do it wherever possible to also then try to avoid misinformation in the future.
Thank you, Jenny, for your input. The next question is, how do you handle community that are not willing to volunteer but will always require payment before getting involved in a project because they felt donors have given out money for every project?
I mean, I think that's very interesting because it really depends on the ethics of if they should be paid. For instance, if you're involving artists or designers who are making new artworks, best practice would be to pay them. So also understand the standards internationally and locally of the industry that you're either working with or using the methods of. But however, one thing that's common here in Canada is if there's a community meeting, they put the posting up and everyone would come to the meeting if you're available and to share input. That would not be expect to be paid. But one thing we often will do is instead provide food, right? Like, so there's still that well wish that their time is being valued and that they're appreciated. So to also just understand when it's appropriate, and if that's also not within your resources, be transparent and speak about that. Uh, However, if it is a big organization, that's something you can bring back to them and say, our community in the past has hoped to be compensated for their time to bring this work, especially if that organization will, say, have any intellectual property connected to the outcomes of the work or have anything that might long-term benefit them that could result in profit. So I think having those upfront conversations, and if you're at a point when then compensation for some reason cannot be given, if you also can't, find those alternative methods to honor people's time, such as, providing a meal, which once again, this is culturally appropriate here in Canada. That may not be the same as in your environment. Then openly say, only participate if these are the terms in which you're comfortable with. This is what's feasible and why. You can even go as far to say, as our organization or I myself, if you're not going against the wishes of the organization, would hope that we would be able to. However, because A, B, and C, we are limited to making no promises of what you can't do, but just always being really open about what is possible and the why. Like people just want to know how you got there. Because quite often they'll assume if a big name or organization's involved, that they have a lot of money. And often those organizations might not actually have a lot of money. So you can bring that into part of the conversation as well. Fran, did you want to add to that?
No, I think it's very complete. I would say maybe only, I mean, be always realistic about what the situation is, and just factor in uh, this is a specific need about a particular like behavior of the community you're working with. So maybe, as Jenny says, it's not only about money; it's about other negotiation things that you can get into, other forms of value that some member of this community might have in participating in some sense, and be very clear about
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this kind of exchange. It doesn't need necessarily to be money always, but I mean, sometimes it is. So maybe sometimes you have to, as Jenny says, like factor that in your budget of the project and find a way to do it. There's always, I mean, I would also advise to go to negotiation, skills. They're as important as the communication tools that we were referring to the other a moment ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And connected to communication, another piece of this is when do you credit people by name and when do you not? And when is that ethically appropriate? Which would be changing from context to context.
All right. Should I take the next question?
Sure. We can take one more question, I
Yeah.
think.
Yes. The question is, how do we measure the impact of our transformation efforts? Any shared tools readily available?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the toolkit under tools and resources, a lot of them can be used to measure, and then also think abstractly on what you think as your successes. To be honest, I often just use Excel, which is not an exciting tool, but there are a lot of other exciting tools that we've shared. Miro is a great one because you can visually represent your successes and then people can respond in an interactive way. We also share some examples of different monitoring and evaluation dashboards. Of course, these are going to be really specific to the type of work you're doing. But we've shared a couple, such as one there's actually called the Climate Ready Communities Assessment Tool, that's actually really specific to this type of work. But you can see we've put a whole bunch of ones. We named some brands. We're not paid or sponsored by them, but just a little bit of an example. And so I'll just say, I'm assuming you mean this question of how do you measure it for yourself, to see this, to measure externally as well, I think brings back to that communications question. And I personally feel if you're collecting and representing through a visual or engaging way for yourself and your organization, that is also a great tool to use externally to make use of creative methods to help build people's interest and to kind of connect with them in different ways, such as like, empathy, something tangible, such as looking at a mind map or visual documentation. I personally, even like when we were looking at those slides of the test beds, I get excited. I didn't attend them all, but by seeing the stories telling themselves. So even though it sounds really cheesy, I think taking pictures is really great, and then connecting it with some of those more formal metrics and measurables. And that might be an Excel spreadsheet like it is for myself, but it could also be making use of participatory mapping platforms or different stakeholder mapping templates. So on page 15 of the toolkit, you can see some examples of these.
Thank you, Jenny, for your input. So, dear participants, due to time limitations, we cannot cover all the questions posted here. As now we have reached the end of the webinar, I want to thank each one of you for your active participation. If you would like to access more webinars and recordings, you can sign up for our premium membership. Participants, please take a moment to fill out the feedback form for today's session. Your input is crucial in helping us to improve. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact us at support@fundsforngos.org. The feedback form will appear on your screen in a moment. Once again, thank you, Fran and Jenny, and to all the
Thank
participants.
you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We look forward to seeing you in our next webinars. Thank you, everyone.